All right, so again, on 36, what I decided to do was just skip it because it's a whole bunch of work to set a window from -6.5 to +6.5. So a lot of steps for not much benefit. And so in the future, I'm going to remove 37, but I know some people have already done it. And so I'll count it right. I'd like you to just put -10 to 10 unless you figure it out.
Wait, I thought we weren't doing 30.
37, I just said we're going to skip it.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
That's okay, my bad. Okay, any other questions before we go? Okay, so number 40. Okay, on this one it says find real zeros, and what we have is x cubed plus 8x squared plus 11x minus 20. So remember there's a p and a q variable. The q variable, or q coefficient, would be in front of the first part, which is in front of the x cubed, and so it's 1. The p would be the -20. So now what you'll notice is if q is 1, then it's easy to get your answers. In other words, they're going to usually show up at the integer level, not at a fraction or a square root. Okay, so just think those are going to be the ones that are a little bit easier to get. So then what we want to do on all of these basically is to graph it and add graph, go x up arrow 3 plus 8x squared plus 11x minus 20, enter. There's the graph. And since they're all at the integers, I can just go to the table and see all three answers. So 1, 0 is one of them, -4, 0 is another, and -5, 0 is the other. Okay. If they don't show up in the table, because sometimes they don't, then you'd have to go menu, analyze, and then 0, and then trap it between two, the left and right. So that'd be how you get it. So in this case, they just want x plus 5 times x plus 4 times x minus 1. By the way, on that previous classwork and on some of these things, they accept if you keep it in the factored out form. Okay, you don't have to multiply it out. Yeah, so it's easier than you think. Okay, number 44. Okay, on this one we have 3x to the third minus 7x squared plus 12x minus 28. Okay, so we're getting the x-intercept, otherwise known as the root. So your first step on all of this is, even though there's a 3 in front, you still want to use your calculator. And so you want to put 3x up arrow 3. Make sure you go to the right and don't stay up above there. Minus 7x squared plus 12x minus 28. Push enter. And I only see one. Remember that it would either have one real root or 3. If it has 1, the other two answers would be imaginary. So what we're going to do is go to menu, analyze, 0, and between here and here is 2.33. Whenever it has 2 decimal places, it could be a rounded answer, and so it's not quite as reliable. That's what we saw on Friday also. On Wednesday also. But if it's 1 decimal place, it is reliable. What I mean by that is if you plug in your number, like I did for this other example, if you plug your answer in and get 0, then it would work perfectly. So I guess I'll do that with this one too, just to show you all what I'm talking about. 3 times, I have 2.33, so I'm going to put 7/3. So I have 7/3 up arrow 3, go to the right, minus 7 times 7/3 squared, whoops, well that's fine, that works, plus 12 times 7/3 minus 28. Okay. 3 times 7/3 cubed minus 7 times... Oh, here I have a divide on accident. So that was my typo. I need to fix that. Okay, minus 7 times parentheses 7/3 close parentheses squared. Okay, so when I typed it right, then I did get 0.
Could you move your calculator?
I will, but you said it's still wrong?
Yeah, because you didn't take the other division.
Okay, I'm plugging in 7/3 to those 3 places and seeing if I got 0. I'm not sure I understand.
Wait, did you put
Like,
the,
for, you need to do 12 times 7/3 instead of 12 times 7/3.
Oh, that doesn't matter. That's a good question. So if I wanted to, I could have done it like she's saying. So 7 divided by 3 like that. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so very good question.
I got a negative.
You got a negative. Okay. I'm going to move this out of the way and then I'll help you. Okay. Okay, so we resolved that. So whenever you're substituting it in, make sure you substitute in the fraction. Because if you just do this rounded thing, it's not going to work perfectly. Okay, so what we need to watch out for is the sign. If we have positive 7/3, we'd have to do negative 7/3 here. And then you don't have to write both of these. Pick one or the other. If you want to do synthetic division, then we change this to be 7/3. And you look at all your coefficients, bring them down, just watch out for if it's a 0, like if it were 0x squared. So in this case, we bring down the 3, negative 7, 12, and negative 28. So how synthetic division works is you always bring down your first, then you do 7/3 times 3, which is 7. Negative 7 plus 7 is 0. Then 0 times 7/3 is 0, so you bring down your 12. And 12 times 7/3 is 28. And then you get 0 here. And so that's how you can check your answer to make sure it works. That's what we were expecting based on getting 7/3. Now, why we did that is because now we have what's called the depressed equation. It's down a level. So this was cubic, and now it's squared. Okay, so we went down a level, and we have our 3x squared plus 0x plus 12, and just factored out a 3. And this is your irreducible quadratic right there. So then you have 3 times x minus 7/3 times x squared plus 4. And on this distribute, make sure you don't distribute to the other term also. You only multiply once, like this one and this one, but not to the x squared plus 4. So you do 3 times x is 3x, and 3 times negative 7/3 is negative 7. So then this would be your answer. If you'd prefer using long division, instead of using 7/3, I'd use 3x minus 7.
why would you use that?
Because if you set it equal to 0, that's what it would be. Does that make sense?
No.
No? Okay. It's easier to work with. How else can I describe that?
Set it equal to 0, then be a positive 7/3.
Yeah, it does turn into positive 7/3, which is what we used here.
What is 3x?
I understand where you get the 3x out of minus 7.
Oh, they're equivalent.
Three on both sides.
Yeah, they're equivalent. If you have a denominator like 3, then that's going to be your coefficient. That's the way to make it work. Got that? Okay. So for example, okay, good discussion here. If it's x minus a half, then you'd have 2x minus 1. Okay? If you have x minus 2/3, then it's going to be 3x minus 2. Yeah, so the denominator becomes your coefficient. Okay, very good discussion there. So when we're doing our long division, remember the difference between synthetic and long is that you have to subtract. So you have this one minus this one cancels, and this one minus a negative also cancels. So then you bring down your 12x and you can't do anything. Then you bring down your negative 28. So then 4 times 3x is 12x. 4 times negative 7 is negative 28. And they both match, so you get 0. So that's just an alternate way instead of synthetic to get the same thing.
To get
The same thing?
the factor.
Yeah, the factor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, to get the factor.
Got it.
So your x squared plus 4 is your quotient, and it's the quotient times your divisor. Okay, very good. Anything else on 44? Okay, the next one, now after a little discussion on this one, this is really 45 from the Math Excel, which you can write out. It's not 45 from the book, but just go with what I have. On a Math Excel example, it had 2x cubed minus 4x squared minus 14x plus 28. The book had x cubed minus 8x squared plus 16x minus, or 17x minus 6. I think this Math Excel one would be more beneficial because you can see a technique that you want to use. Everything is even, and so you divide by 2. If it's all even coefficients and constants, then divide by 2. Then you get your x cubed minus 2x squared minus 7x plus 14. And then it turns into something pretty close to, what the book had.
Wait, what are we trying to find here?
Okay, we're trying to find our roots and the equation. Find the roots and the equation. By the way, just as a quick thing, the way the Math Excel problems work is both of these have x cubed, and then the book had an even integer, and so negative 2 is even, 17 is odd, negative 7 is odd, 6 is even, 14 is even. So it picks random numbers that are still odd or even. So that's the way it works when you have multiple versions. Okay, so what you first want to do on this one is graph it. Your first step is always graph. So we would do new document, add graph, x up arrow 3 minus 2x squared minus 7x plus 14. Okay, so my first step is to graph it. And you see it crosses at 3 places. Again, your first step is just find an integer, if at all possible. Like this one, the first one, it's between 2 numbers, so that's not going to be an easy one to work with. The integer would be right there because it's 2, 0. The others you can estimate, but when we do our synthetic and long division, you can't use an estimate. Okay, that's going to mess you up if you use an estimate. So we want to use the 2. So when you're doing synthetic division, you need a positive 2, or if you're doing long division, you need a negative 2, like x minus 2. All right, so how we set it up is we bring our coefficients there, so 1, -2, -7, 14, and just work it out. Bring it down, 2 times 1 is 2, that turns into 0, that turns into 0. Bring down the -7. Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Yeah, they just go up a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I went a little bit too fast. Got too
I
excited.
feel like up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Okay, sorry my pacing was a little off. I thought y'all were further. Okay,
You can go down. I'm good.
okay. Okay, so to start with, we take our coefficients and constants. And it was 2, 0, and so we need a 2 there. So then how synthetic division works is you bring down the first one, so we've got the 1. Then you do your 2 times 1, and the answer goes right there. Yeah, then you do -2 plus 2 and get 0. Then you do 0 times 2 and you get 0. Yes. Pep rally schedule, 10:25. Yeah, so lots of time. Okay, so then once you got that, -7 plus 0 is -7. Then 2 times -7 is -14, and then that turns into 0. Okay, so once we do that, we get our depressed equation, which turns into x squared minus 7 equals 0. And you end up with plus and minus square root of 7. Now, when I did this on the scratch pad and I did square root of 7 as a decimal, like this, go to the calculate screen, square root of 7, control, enter. That shows me 2.645. So that's actually the rounded number, or that's the exact number that was rounded on the document. So, in other words, if I go to this one, this shows me only 2 decimal places, which is not reliable. That's why you just need to look for the integers, okay? And once you got your integer, then figure it out. So then there are 3 answers. You get plus and minus square root of 7, comma 2. The other way, which first period actually mentioned, was because it has 4 terms, you could have factored by grouping. Doesn't matter to me which method you do. Yes?
Can you get the same answer if you don't divide by 2 like the first step?
You have to divide by 2 whether it's synthetic or long. Or unless you factor by grouping.
I get the very top, like the
Oh, you probably could, but you have a lot bigger numbers to work with.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be harder to factor and decide what, but it should work. It's just easier to make a mistake.
It only works if they're all even.
Yeah, it only works if they're all even. Okay, so real quickly about factoring by grouping, if you choose to do it that way, sometimes you have to switch your second and third terms, but in this one we did not have to. I just factor out the biggest thing between these two, and I factor out an x squared, so I get x minus 2. On this one, my greatest common factor would be -7, so I also have x minus 2. Your goal is to get the same thing, okay? And so if you get the same thing, then you write it once, and then this other stuff is the remaining term. So again, that would give you the same results as over here. 2, and then plus and minus square root of 7. Any questions? Okay, so whichever method you want to use, whether it's synthetic, long, or factor by grouping. Okay, 48. So on 48, we have x to the 4th minus x cubed minus 6x squared plus 4x plus 8. X to the fourth minus x cubed minus 6x squared plus 4x plus 8. So on that one, I just graphed it and it crossed. Yes. Go ahead. Okay. So on that one, I'm going to graph it, and you can see what it's going to do. Your first step is always graph. So we go x up arrow 4 minus x up arrow 3 minus 6x squared plus 4x plus 8. Enter. Okay, so I see that there are 3 places it crosses, but it's a 4th power. So the first 2 are odd multiplicity, and the last one is even multiplicity. So that's where it touches or bounces. So at negative 2, 0, it's odd multiplicity, and because it crosses. At negative 1, 0, it's also odd, but at 2, 0, it's even. That's where it touches or bounces. And so your equation is x plus 2 times x plus 1 times x minus 2 squared. Notice it was squared because it touched or bounced.
Even touches.
Yeah. Right. Right. Odd crosses. Bless you. Okay, so after 48, I jumped all the way to 60. On this one, there's lots of decimals. All right, this one, x to the fourth plus 1.2x cubed minus 7.46x squared minus 4.692x plus 15.2881. Okay, so on that one, when you graph it, you can see that there would be 2 x-intercepts. So that means there must have been 2 imaginary. And all we want are the real answers, not the imaginary. There's a later section where you have to get the imaginary, but that's not section 4.2. Okay, so when you do that and graph it, there were 2 of them. Oh, these actually had even multiplicity because they bounced in both places. And so you have negative 2.3 and positive 1.7. I got that because I graphed it. Right. So if y'all want me to do that, you go x up arrow 4 plus 1.2 x up arrow 3 minus 7.46 x squared. Tab. Let me continue. Minus 4.692 x plus 15.2881. Okay, so there we go. And then you go menu, analyze, 0. Between there and there is your negative 2.3. And menu, analyze, 0. Between there and there is the 1.7. So if it only has 1 decimal place, we're very confident that, it's not a rounded answer. So I used curly braces for set notation. Any questions? Set notation, like these are your 2 answers. Negative 2.3 and 1.7. It's not the ordered pair negative 2.3 comma 1.7. It's negative 2.30 and 1.70. So whenever you talk about set notation, that's the one with the curly braces. And these are your ordered pairs with the comma 0. Okay? Then the next one, 64, we have 2x to the third plus 3x squared plus 2x plus 3 equal to 0. So I really just set it equal to the function 1. I graph it, do the exact same thing, and I got a negative 1.5. And so you can either have your set as negative 1.5 or as negative 3 halves, because those are equivalent. Any questions on 64? All right. Then number 68. This one has 2x cubed minus 11x squared plus 10x plus 8. This one, when I graphed it, I saw all three answers. It's negative a half, 2, and 4. So your solution set is negative a half, 2, and 4. Do y'all need me to graph that?
No.
Okay. All right. Move it up a little bit.
Wait, what does it say? The what say?
Solution set. Yeah, thank you. It will. It will. Yeah, always graph it for your first step, and you may be able to get everything. That set of directions said find the real solutions. Now, as I'm looking at the answers, some of them are square roots, and some are fractions. But for 68, it was like that. Okay, very good. Anything else? Okay, our last two that we're doing, number 72 has x to the third power minus 2/3 x squared plus 3x minus 2. When you do your x-intercept or solution of that one, it's just positive 2/3. The decimal that it shows is 0.667, which is a rounded number, because originally, it's like 0.6 repeat. And so it was just showing 3 decimal places, and so they want the fraction 2/3 for that. The fraction 2/3. Okay, then on the last one, it's the intermediate value theorem. You don't have to draw these two graphs, but this is basically what the theorem means. If, say, you have a dot down here and above, then it had to cross at some point, so you have an x-intercept between here and here. Okay, so intermediate means between, so between this point and this point, it had to cross the x-axis. On this example, it's between here and here, so somewhere it had to cross the x-axis. So what they tell you is this equation, you have 3x to the third minus 10x plus 9, and the interval they're giving you is -3, -2. What you do is you substitute in for x for both of them, and on the first one I got -42, and on the next one I got a 5. So I got -42 and I got 5. Since I got one of them negative and the other positive, that means it crossed the x-axis. And then what I did, and I can show you this, when I graph it, I saw the exact answer. 3x up arrow 3 minus 10x plus 9. Enter. Okay, so here it crossed at one spot, and I go menu, analyze, 0, between here and here is -2.17. By the way, remember, if you didn't want to plug in the numbers, you could have just done the whole equation like we've said before. Like go to your table, and then you can see the -2 was 5, and the -3 was -42. So that's another way, without actually substituting, that you can see your answers because it's done for you. And so it does cross. If you have 2 negatives or 2 positives, then it did not cross in that interval. Yes, ma'am.